This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 3. The construction is underway. Verse 1. Then Solomon began to build Yahweh's house at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where Yahweh appeared to David his father, which he prepared in the place that David had appointed, on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. He began to build in the 2nd day of the 2nd month in the 4th year of his reign. Comment in verse 1, Solomon built the temple in the place David appointed, which was on the threshing floor that he bought from Ornan the Jebusite on Mount Moriah, adjacent to the city of David. The name Moriah appears in only one other verse of the Bible, Genesis 22:2, where Yahweh told Abraham, quote, "Now take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go into the land of Moriah, offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you of." End quote. So Abraham set out, taking Isaac with him, and 3 days from home God showed him that one mountain. Was it the same as Mount Moriah on which Solomon built the temple? It is a 3-day journey from Beersheba, where Abraham was living, so that part of it checks out. Abraham offering Isaac on that mountain was a very clear foreshadowing of God offering Christ. Assuming the Genesis offering took place on the future Temple Mount, it was also the place Yahweh relented from destroying Israel after David's census, 1 Chronicles 21. So there have already been 2 very significant events at that site, both of them very clearly foreshadowing the sacrifice of Christ and the withdrawal of God's hand of destruction. Now it'll be the site of the temple where thousands of animal sacrifices will take place, all of them foreshadowing the sacrifice of Christ as well. So there's an unspoken but unmistakable message here for anyone who's halfway paying attention that God had Christ and the withdrawal of his hand of destruction in mind all along. Just a note from verse 2 on dates. Construction began in the 4th year of Solomon's reign. This corresponded to the 480th year since the beginning of the Exodus, 1 Kings 6:1, which to us is 966 BC, according to the NET Bible translation notes. By the way, this would mean David was on the throne at exactly 1000 BC, which is a nice round figure and easy to remember. But back to laying the foundation, verse 3. Now these are the foundations which Solomon laid for the building of God's house. The length by cubits after the first measure was 60 cubits, and the width 20 cubits. The porch that was in front, its length according to the width of the house, was 20 cubits, and the height 120, and he overlaid it within with pure gold. Comment, a cubit's about 1.5 feet, so in verse 3, the footprint of the temple was 90 by 30 feet, which is 2,700 square feet, which doesn't sound impressive until we read the description of it. In verse 4, it had a porch in front that ran the full width of the house, which was 30 feet, and it came out from the house 15 feet, 1 Kings 6:3. In verse 4, the height of the house was 180 feet, which is equivalent to 18 stories, and seems very unlikely. This must be a scribal copy error, because the height of the temple was 45 feet in 1 Kings 6:2, which is much more like it. The temple had 3 stories of storerooms wrapping all around it on all sides but the front, 1 Kings 6. As far as grand spaces or grand rooms, there were 2 of them, a larger room in front with a cathedral ceiling that went 45 feet all the way up, and a smaller room beyond that which will house the ark. We'll comment on the coming verses now before we read them. The temple was built with massive stones, but the larger room was completely lined with cedar, floor, walls, and ceiling. But no wood was showing because every inch of it was plated with gold, including the floor. Before plating, decorative carvings were done in the wood of cherubim, palm trees, flower buds, and open flowers. The ceiling had carvings of palm trees and either carvings of chains or solid gold chains affixed to it. Plus there were precious stones set in the larger room, probably not on the floors, but at least on the walls or ceiling. Verse 5, he made the larger room with a ceiling of cypress wood, which he overlaid with fine gold and ornamented it with palm trees and chains. He decorated the house with precious stones for beauty. The gold was gold from Parvaim. He also overlaid the house, the beams, the thresholds, its walls, and its doors with gold, and engraved cherubim in the walls. Comment, coming up, the smaller room beyond was a perfect cube, 30 by 30 by 30 feet. So it wasn't small except as compared to the first room. It was the most holy place, or Holy of Holies. It too was totally lined with cedar, floor, walls, and ceiling, with carvings on it, 1 Kings 6:29, all plated with gold. 2 giant carved statues of cherubim stood on the floor 15 feet tall, which was half the height of the room. They stood side by side facing the larger room with their wings outstretched. Together their wings spanned the width of the room, touching the walls on each side and touching each other in the center of the room above the ark. They were made of engraved olive wood, 1 Kings 6:23, and plated with gold. Verse 8, He made the most holy place. Its length according to the width of the house was 20 cubits, and its width 20 cubits, and he overlaid it with fine gold amounting to 600 talents. The weight of the nails was 50 shekels of gold. He overlaid the upper rooms with gold. In the most holy place he made 2 cherubim by carving, and they overlaid them with gold. The wings of the cherubim were 20 cubits long. The wing of the one was 5 cubits, reaching to the wall of the house, and the other wing was 5 cubits, reaching to the wing of the other cherub. The wing of the other cherub was 5 cubits, reaching to the wall of the house, and the other wing was 5 cubits, joining to the wing of the other cherub. The wings of these cherubim spread themselves out 20 cubits. They stood on their feet, and their faces were toward the house. Comment, coming up, a curtain or veil separated the 2 rooms. The dimensions of them are not given anywhere in the Bible, but there were also 2 doors between the rooms, 1 Kings 6:31. So in addition to the veil, there had to be a solid wall between the rooms in which to set the doors, even if the wall was only partial. There were also gold chains drawn across between the larger and smaller rooms, 1 Kings 6:21. Verse 14, He made the veil of blue, purple, crimson, and fine linen, and ornamented it with cherubim. Comment, now coming, there were 2 pillars standing on either side of the porch. They didn't support anything, they were just freestanding pillars, but given the dimensions of them, it would seem they'd have to be stabilized from tipping over by being affixed to the side of the building. Together with the capitals that were on them, they were about 60 feet high, which was 15 feet taller than the building. They were cast from molten brass and hollow, 18 feet in circumference, which makes them about 6 feet in diameter, 1 Kings 7:15-21. So given the relatively narrow base of the pillars, thus the probable need for stabilization against the building in your narrator's mind. Verse 15. Also he made before the house 2 pillars of 35 cubits height, and the capital that was on top of each of them was 5 cubits. He made chains in the inner sanctuary and put them on tops of the pillars, and he made 100 pomegranates and put them on the chains. He set up the pillars before the temple, one on the right hand and the other on the left, and called the name of that on the right hand Yakin, and the name of that on the left Boaz. Comment, in verse 16, quote, He made chains in the inner sanctuary and put them on the tops of the pillars, end quote. There might be some corruption of the text here, or there's something we don't understand about the manufacturing of chains in the inner sanctuary, then transferring them to the capitals of the pillars outside. In verse 17, the pillars had names, the one on the right Yakin, and on the left Boaz. Yakin means he will establish, and Boaz is uncertain, but possibly it means strength. Since Hebrews read from right to left, the pillars might be translated, he establishes in strength, which would make sense because a pillar is a symbol of strength. And we might also say he establishes in beauty because the pillars were highly decorated, 1 Kings 7. Since the Holy Spirit lives in us, our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, 1 Corinthians 6:19. The Temple of Solomon illustrates the grandeur, strength, beauty, and riches that God imparts to us. When Isaac Watt wrote, Would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I, which was his original wording, it was probably a good description of us before redemption, but not after. 2 Chronicles 4 is next.